God, where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
There was a time when a single face could define what masculinity looked like. For many, that face belonged to Clark Gable. He was confidence without effort, and charm without apology. A man the world believed had everything. But behind that image was a life far more complicated. He loved more than once. Some relationships built him, some nearly broke him, and some were never meant to last. Because for all the women who passed through his life, wives, lovers, and fleeting connections, only one ever truly reached his heart, and before the end of his life, that truth became impossible to ignore. The woman who built the man he became, Josephine Dillon. Before the fame, before the confidence, before the world ever knew him as Clark Gable, there was a man still being shaped. And standing at the center of that transformation was Josephine Dillon. She was not drawn to glamour. She was drawn to potential. When she met him, Gable was rough around the edges. Ambitious, yes, but unrefined. His voice lacked polish. His presence lacked control. In many ways, he was still searching for the man he might become. Josephine didn't just see him. She believed she could build him. She trained his voice, correcting his diction word by word. She refined his posture, his mannerisms, even his appearance. She invested not just time, but belief. The kind of belief that quietly reshapes a person from the inside out. And eventually, he became exactly what she had seen. But transformation comes with a cost. As Gable began to rise, something subtle began to shift between them. The dynamic that once held them together, teacher and student, builder and becoming, no longer fit the life he was stepping into. Hollywood didn't need the man he used to be. And slowly, neither did he. There was no dramatic ending, no single moment that broke everything apart. Just distance, the kind that grows quietly, almost unnoticed, until, one day, it's already too far to return. Josephine Dillon helped create Clark Gable, but she would not be the woman who stayed with him. Some people shape who we become, but are not meant to stay and see who we turn into. A marriage that gave him power, not love. Rhett Langham. By the time Clark Gable entered his second marriage, he was no longer the uncertain man Josephine Dillon had once guided. He was rising, and with that rise came a different kind of relationship. One built not on transformation, but on position. Rhett Langham was everything Hollywood respected. Wealthy, connected, established. She moved within circles that Gable had only just begun to enter. And for a man determined to secure his place in that world, her presence offered something undeniable: access, stability, status. On the surface, it worked. Their marriage placed him closer to the center of Hollywood's elite. Doors opened more easily. Conversations carried more weight. The man who had once struggled to be seen was now being noticed everywhere. But beneath that polished surface, something essential was missing. Because while Rhett offered structure, she did not offer closeness. And while Gable gained position, he did not find peace. The distance between them wasn't loud. It didn't erupt into constant conflict. Instead, it existed in quieter ways, the kind that often go unnoticed from the outside. Different rhythms, different needs, different understandings of what a life together should feel like. And then there were the affairs. Gable's attention began to drift, not always out of passion, but out of something harder to define. Restlessness, perhaps, or the growing realization that what he had built with Rhett was never rooted in something deep enough to hold him. Some marriages begin with love and slowly lose it. Others begin without it and never quite find it at all. By the time their relationship began to unravel, the truth had already settled in. This marriage had given Clark Gable a place in the world, but it had never truly given him a place to belong. And somewhere beneath the success, beneath the attention, beneath the image he was becoming, Something in him was still searching. The secret affair that followed him forever. Loretta Young. By the mid-1930s, Clark Gable had become more than a rising actor. He was a presence, confident, desired, untouchable in the eyes of the public. But behind that image was a life that didn't always follow the same rules the world believed in. And then came Loretta Young. They met while working on Call of the Wild, a production that, on the surface, was just another step forward in his career. But somewhere between the long days on set and the quiet moments away from it, something began. Not loud, not public, but real enough to leave consequences that would last far beyond the film itself. Loretta was different from the women who had come before. There was a softness to her, a composure that felt grounded in something deeper than Hollywood appearances. She carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity, one that didn't demand attention, yet naturally drew it. And perhaps, for a moment, Gable allowed himself to step into something less controlled. But Hollywood, at that time, was not a place that allowed truth to exist freely. When Loretta became pregnant, the situation was not something that could be acknowledged, not publicly, not without consequences that could damage careers, reputations, entire lives. So, a decision was made, one that would follow them both for years. Their daughter, Judy Lewis, was born in secrecy and later presented to the world as adopted, a carefully constructed story designed to protect an image that could not afford to be broken. And Gable remained silent. There are moments in life that don't end when they're over. They stay. Not always visible, not always spoken about, but present. This was not a relationship that continued. It did not grow into something lasting or something openly remembered, but it became something else, a shadow, a truth that existed just beneath the surface of everything that followed. Because some choices don't disappear with time. They simply learn how to live quietly beside it. The woman who finally reached his heart, Carole Lombard. By the time Clark Gable met Carole Lombard, he had already lived through different kinds of connection. Some had shaped him. Some had elevated him. Some had quietly unsettled him, but none had truly reached him. And then there was Carole. She did not enter his life with strategy. She did not offer status or control or the kind of careful structure he had known before. What she brought was something far less predictable and far more real. She brought ease. There was a lightness to her, a humor that didn't try to impress, a presence that made everything around her feel less complicated. With Carole, Gable was not performing. He wasn't the image the world admired. He was simply himself. And that difference changed everything. Their connection wasn't built on intensity or mystery. It didn't need to be. It grew in quieter ways, through shared laughter, through moments that didn't feel like they had to mean something, through a kind of comfort that didn't demand explanation. For the first time, there was no restlessness, no need to look elsewhere, no distance slowly forming beneath the surface, just presence. And in that presence, something settled within him. They married in 1939, not as a calculated step forward, but as a natural continuation of something that already felt certain. To the outside world, they were a celebrated couple. But what mattered more was what existed away from the cameras. A life that felt real. Some loves arrive loudly, demanding to be noticed. Others arrive quietly and change everything without asking. Carole Lombard did not just become another chapter in Clark Gable's life. She became the place where the searching stopped, and perhaps, for the first time, he understood what it meant not to look beyond what he already had. A marriage that could not heal his loss. Sylvia Ashley. In the years after loss, life does not stop. It moves forward, whether we are ready or not. For Clark Gable, the world continued exactly as it always had. There were films to make, appearances to maintain, a life that, from the outside, still looked complete. But something within him had changed, and into that changed life came Sylvia Ashley. She was elegant, well-known, and accustomed to the kind of world Gable lived in. There was no uncertainty about how to exist beside fame. No adjustment needed. On paper, it made sense. Two people who understood the same life. Two people who could, in theory, build something stable. They married in 1949. But stability is not the same as connection. Because what Sylvia entered was not a new beginning. It was a life already shaped by something that had not ended. Gable was present, but not entirely. There are parts of a person that remain with what they have lost, not visibly, not in ways that can be explained, but in ways that are felt, quietly, constantly. And Sylvia, whether she fully understood it or not, was living beside that absence. There was no single conflict that defined their marriage, no dramatic fracture that brought it to an end. Instead, there was distance, a quiet lack of something that neither of them could quite create together. Because some wounds are not meant to be healed by someone else, they are simply carried. And over time, that truth became impossible to ignore. Their marriage ended in 1952, not with anger, not with scandal, but with the quiet understanding that what they had built was never strong enough to replace what had been lost. Some relationships fail because of what goes wrong. Others fail because of what never truly arrives. And for Clark Gable, this was one of them. His final marriage and the life he settled for, Kay Spreckles. By the mid-1950s, Clark Gable was no longer the man the world had first come to know. Time had changed him. Not dramatically, not in ways that could be easily seen, but quietly. The energy that once defined him had softened. The certainty remained, but it carried less urgency. Life, after everything he had experienced, no longer felt like something to chase. It felt like something to live through. And then came Kay Spreckles. She was younger, grounded, and far removed from the emotional weight that had defined so much of his past. With her, there was no expectation to recreate what had been lost, no attempt to replace something that could never truly be replaced. And perhaps that was why it worked. They married in 1955. Their life together was quieter than the chapters that came before, less visible, less defined by the intensity that had once shaped his relationships, but also less complicated. Kay did not try to reach into the parts of him that remained untouched. She did not demand a version of him that no longer existed. Instead, she accepted what was there. And in that acceptance, something steady formed. Not the kind of love that overwhelms, but the kind that remains. There is a difference. In the final years of his life, Gable was no longer searching. Not in the way he once had. The restlessness had faded, not because it had been fully resolved, but because life had shown him what could and could not return. Kay gave him companionship, a sense of presence, a life that, while quieter, was still shared. But even in that quiet, there are truths that do not change, because settling is not the same as forgetting, and some loves once lived are never replaced, only carried forward. The one woman he truly loved, Carole Lombard. In the final years of his life, Clark Gable was no longer defined by the roles he played or the image the world had once admired. Time had a way of simplifying things, not by erasing the past, but by clarifying it. He had known different kinds of connection throughout his life. Some had shaped him. Some had elevated him. Some had left behind questions that were never fully answered. And some had quietly faded. But one had not. Carole Lombard was not just a memory. She was something that remained. Not in a way that demanded attention. Not in a way that needed to be spoken about constantly. But in a way that existed beneath everything else. Steady, unchanged, and impossible to replace. Those who observed him in his later years often spoke of a quiet truth, that, while he had continued living, continued working, even continued loving in his own way. Something in him had never moved on. Because not all love stories end when a life moves forward. Some continue, in silence. He had shared his life with others after her, built something that resembled stability, found companionship in the years that followed. But deep down, there was a difference between living with someone and being known by someone. And Carole had known him, not the image, not the expectation, but the man. There are moments in life when everything becomes clear, not suddenly, but gradually, as time removes what doesn't last, and what remains is truth. For Clark Gable, that truth was simple. After everything, after all the years, all the relationships, all the attempts to move forward, only one love had truly stayed. Not in his life, but in his heart. In the end, the life of Clark Gable was not only a story of fame, success, or the roles he played on screen. It was a story of searching, of becoming, of loving, and losing. Because not every relationship is meant to last. Not every connection is meant to define us forever. But sometimes, quietly and without warning, one person does. And even when life moves forward, that truth remains. So tell me, do you believe we only truly love once? If this story meant something to you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who remembers these days, and subscribe for more timeless stories like this.